Welcome. I'm Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. For more than 25 years, this TV series has explored a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. Really, how many people actually pay attention to local government's detailed decisions about zoning, paying for streets and sewers, and so forth? Hardly anyone seems to be paying close attention, except those who have a direct financial stake in those decisions, such as real estate developers and others who can turn a profit from local government's decisions. So what happens as a result? The special interests are able to exploit local governments to serve their own narrow economic interests, while the rest of us never know when we're being ripped off. The public needs some people to pay close attention to local government decisions and protect the broad public interest. We'll talk about these kinds of issues and a few local case studies, such as the Olympia Conference Center that was not built because an aroused public stopped it, and Olympia's isthmus that the broad public wants to turn into a public park. I'm happy to welcome two guests who can explore these and related issues. We have Walt Jorgensen and Bob Jacobs, both people that I have known and respected for a good number of years. Walt has served on the Tumwater City Council, and Bob was a mayor of Olympia. Both Walt and Bob volunteer actively as positive forces for local governments to be ethical and responsive to the broad public interest. Both work to protect the public's financial and environmental needs, and both are active with the Carnegie Group, a public interest nonprofit group that we'll talk about later in the program. So welcome to Walt and Bob. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For decades, the elites and the businesses that run local communities across the country have been talking about growth. We got to have more growth. And they want us to bring more people and more businesses into local communities. And this happens pretty much across the country. Why do these folks want growth?
Because they profit from it.
Oh, that was in the introduction to this
Very
program.
Very simple.
Is that that's it?
It's very
That's the
simple.
basic?
When you have growth, you have work for contractors, you have work for architects, you have work for lots of people, attorneys who benefited. Eben Foder's book talks about it as the growth machine. It is a growth machine.
Okay, and this is a fellow who's done a lot of work. He's based in Eugene. It's E-B-E-N
Yep.
F-O-D-R-O-R.
F-O-D-O-R.
F-O-D-O-R, yeah. What are these interests not telling us about growth? I know we'll get into some parts of this. What are some basic things that they aren't telling us about growth?
Well, they downplay the costs of growth to all of us, and those costs are in more waiting in lines on the road. It's in more environmental pollution. It's in paying right out of our pocketbooks for the costs of growth directly, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, so there are a variety of kinds of costs, including
Absolutely.
traffic jams and things, as well as financial outlays from the public.
And there are also some benefits from growth, one must admit. So, you know, it's a question of your own values, where you think things ought to be, whether you think growth is good or bad.
What benefits might there be?
Well, if you're an opera fan, you're not likely to have an opera in Yelm or Olympia, but you will have one in Seattle and Tacoma.
Okay.
When you get more growth, more people, you get a wider variety of job opportunities, you get a wider variety of shopping opportunities, and these are real benefits.
Okay.
No question in my mind, but there are benefits to go along with the costs. Just that the financial impact has been so heavily weighted against the citizens in the past that the net effect, I think, has been negative.
Well, and the word growth is simply an attractive word. We talk about growth, and it has a positive kind of impact right away. Personal growth, intellectual growth, economic growth, if it's yours. But we never we don't associate that with what causes the growth, or in fact, in this case, Bob's alluded to, what was the need in the first place for the growth. The impetus for growth is often been referred to as another Ponzi scheme. Is that as it keeps moving forward, it generates needs, and it generates profits for those that are involved, and they might say the leading edge of it. And as far as you mentioned opera, maybe Bob's never been out and seen the Tenino Opera. Well, maybe not. But all you have to do is look to another city, and any other city that's somewhat bigger than you, twice as big as you, 3 times, maybe just a little bit bigger. What do they have that you want? And I think it's always a good question to ask yourself is, where are you going? You don't have to wonder about that because lots of other cities have already gone there.
Yeah, okay.
This is so much a part of our kind of national religion almost, that we have economic development entities in virtually every community doing the best they can to make things grow. And we use tax money to fund those organizations. This is a really interesting phenomenon when you think about it, when I believe, and most people believe, the impact is negative, so why should we pay taxes to get something negative?
Well, and many of them will have bidding wars. You know, oh, if you build your factory here, we'll give you no taxes for 20 years or whatever, you know. And I know when I've read studies of what happens, it turns out that the increased economic activity for the local community is usually not enough to cover what they've given away.
That's right.
By allowing tax-free building or plus all the additional costs.
And we can certainly put port districts in that same category.
And we'll talk about a port district that we know locally later in this program. So the people who are calling for local growth pretend that it's going to be good for all of us. And of course, as you've been saying, some people profit a lot by it, and other people pay the costs, including hidden costs. Are there some other hidden costs that we pay, or who pays for local growth, Walt?
Well, the hidden costs are the impacts that the built structure that is the manifestation of this particular kind of growth cause. So if you, for instance, one of your choices could be to either not build all the infrastructure, if you're as a government, that would be required to maintain what we call level of service, which is, we can think of it in terms of traffic, how traffic moves around. If we want to maintain that level of service, then you have to build infrastructure. That's new exits and entrances to the freeway, wider roads, traffic lights. Those are pretty expensive. But you could also choose not to do that, or you could choose to not do some of it. And then the impact now that you avoid in terms of economic cost to you, the government, is felt in a degraded service to everybody in the community.
Yeah, longer waits at intersections, more crud in the air, whatever. Yeah. There's a concept in economics that talks about externalizing costs, and I think this has been something that's been a concern for me. It means avoiding the true costs by dumping those true costs onto somebody else. I just want to give 2 examples so the viewers will get a handle on what this might mean. If I own a factory and I want to take the cheap way out and not deal with the pollution that my factory pollutes, I might just dump the pollution directly into the river, and then the people downstream get sick or have to deal with my pollution, or somehow it becomes their problem. I've externalized my costs by not doing the full cost of having my factory, and I've externalized it and dumped it onto other people. Another example would be Walmart is notorious for paying terrible wages and trying to not pay benefits. And so
you must be reading the news. I mean, some of the Walmart employees are addressing that.
Yeah, they've been having some strikes and things. And so what happens, I've read a number of times, is that when people go to work for Walmart and they're not going to be getting benefits, Walmart upon hiring the people, we'll tell them how to go find applications for food stamps or Medicaid. And so Walmart is externalizing their costs instead of providing benefits like a legitimate, honest employer would do. They've externalized the cost by dumping it onto the taxpayers. So those are just like two examples. Right. How do you see local governments or local communities dealing with the externalization of costs related to growth, and we mentioned some of this. Are there other things we need to say? One of the, you're both active with the Carnegie Group, and one of your early and persistent principles has been that growth should pay for growth.
In fact, our bumper sticker, which we've had for, well, a long time, says question growth.
Yes.
And truly that's the place to start. In some cases, you may find that the growth you're looking at is something that that benefits what you're interested in. But it's always healthy to question things in general and growth specifically.
Yeah.
That's really a subset of the big question, which is question everything.
Yeah.
Don't take anything at face value, question it all. This is just a safe, smart thing to do.
Yeah. Well, that'd be,
and growth particularly,
yeah,
because there's so many people that benefit from it who are telling us that it's great and it's therefore good for us and we should support it, even though it hurts us.
Yeah, this would be great for a democracy. You know, if you want to have a good, vibrant democracy, you should encourage the people of that jurisdiction, whether it's the whole nation or a local community, to question things. Let's question our foreign policy. Let's question our tax system. Let's question everything. And if enough people did enough questioning, we would come up with some way better solutions than what we have now in any aspect of public life. Growth can entail some other costs and problems. We've talked about some. Are there other things you want to mention in the way of other costs, or do you want to do some more about Eben Fodor's concepts?
Would this be a good time to run through this little
do
chart that I prepared?
Yeah,
I prepared this because just talking through it is very difficult. People's eyes glaze over awfully quickly. Growth costs in the terms that we're talking about, that is the construction of new housing developments, new factories, new shopping centers, whatever, involves basically three kinds of costs that are added to the community. Because in essence, what we're doing is piece by piece building another community.
Yeah.
Operating costs are automatically covered because the new people and businesses coming to an area pay the same taxes we do. And so the operating costs, like teacher salaries, police officers' salaries, fixing the roads and all of that, that's paid by the taxes that they pay. On-site facilities also need to be provided, and those are also automatically covered because when someone builds, say, a housing development, they're required to put in the sewer, the water, the roads, the fire hydrants, the street lights, all of that on-site work is done and then turned over to the municipality. Those are automatic. The place where the public has been forced to pay over the years and is still forced to pay to some extent regardless is here. It's the off-site facilities. That is, you've got your housing development, but people moving there, increasing the population, are going to need schools. They're going to need parks. These are things off the site where they live. And just really quickly.
Yeah, so the site you're talking about is the actual
site of the development.
And
okay. So looking at off-site facilities, which is where the problem has been, we have laws that provide charges that governments may impose to cover some of the costs of those off-site facilities to serve the new population, the new transportation, and so forth. We have utility connection fees, which have been allowed in state law for over 50 years. So when this housing development hooks up those houses to the water system, to the sewer system, there are fees charged, and that is to pay for the pipes and the pumps and all that goes on there. We also have the State Environmental Policy Act that's about 30 years old that allows for certain fees to be charged to development to cover impacts. And then finally, about 20 years ago, with the Growth Management Act, we got impact fees, which are allowed for schools, for streets, for parks, and for fire facilities. However, even with those fees, when they're fully charged, the taxpayers must pay a portion of these off-site facility costs for new development, because you'll notice that there are no impact fees for jails, police stations, libraries, museums. There's a whole long list of kinds of off-site facilities that need to be increased to serve new populations, which we cannot charge them for.
Okay.
So we, by law, by state law, are required to subsidize growth.
Okay, now, when you were describing these, it was like they may charge. Are there some communities that are not charging the new development, the new shopping mall, the new housing development, the whatever?
Yes, and of
If
course,
they're
the development community across this country has been very successful forever in controlling city councils and county commissions, and they don't like these charges particularly, and so when they can, they get them not charged. So the utility connection fees are available to all municipalities, and SEPA fees are available to all municipalities. Impact fees are not even legally available to all municipalities. These are only where the Growth Management Act applies, basically the larger, faster growing counties.
So some people are being ripped off.
And some
worse than
communities
others.
don't charge them.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and
Just
here's an
charge the taxpayer.
Yeah,
Here's
so-
an example.
yeah.
The county just last week
Just
finally.
in actually last week as we taped this. Which
I'm
was,
sorry.
early
Right,
November.
yeah.
Mid-November.
Yeah. By the time
Yeah.
you see this, sometime way back in 2012, finally implemented impact fees.
Yeah.
And this is just to size this a little bit for everybody. This is important because back in 2000, as a part of a political campaign, we did some research and determined at that point that, conservatively speaking, the county had already left about $200 million worth of potential impact fees on the table. Now, this is 10 years, 12 years later. I don't know if you can double that to $500 million, but it's certainly more. And in the case of, Bob was alluding to the fact that we could only collect impact fees in these 4 areas. I'd add to that, utilities, like you said, it has connection fees for probably 50 years. So we really collect it in maybe 5 or 6 areas, you might say. But we don't do it to build city halls, and especially when you think about the county, what we don't collect impact fees for is jails and whole criminal justice system in general. And that's what, 75% of the
Right.
county's always
Budget.
Yeah, I hate to say budget because sometimes you have to say general budget versus earmarked funds, but it's a big chunk.
Yeah.
The county basically is in the
Yeah.
road and criminal justice business.
Yeah. So these are things. Yeah, the criminal justice system is huge in the county. I worked on the efforts to prevent the gigantic jail from being built in about 2005 or whatever, and then they came back and built one that's not quite as humongous, but that they wouldn't need support, taxpayers, voters to vote for it, and then they couldn't afford to operate even that one. So, but so these costs, some of these costs are not really front and center for the voters to be aware of. And then when people complain about high taxes, the only stuff they can retaliate against is vote against the school levy or vote against the library operating funds or something. And we don't get a chance to vote against other stuff, and especially we don't get a chance to vote against nuclear weapons. We don't get a chance to vote against a new war. The really big ticket items, they don't let us vote on. They make us fight over schools or something. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's like, question everything. Question how we fund our wars. Question how we fund the war on drugs.
One of the biggest pieces of advice that we got from our people that formed our country, and you can see it from several sources, is this question, is be skeptical, ask questions.
Yeah.
And you were that skepticism, if you will, that questioning is an essential form of a democratic government.
Yeah. We have in the popular way of thinking, a lot of people who are just like mad at paying for taxes. They don't want government spending, and they're not distinguishing between spending that would be like an investment in the future, good infrastructure, versus spending that's not so good. And when we were talking on the phone to prepare for the program, Bob, you wanted to make that distinction about.
Well, for instance, take a city whose high school is really old, decrepit, in bad shape, inadequate, and decides that it wants to have a new high school to serve its children. And it does that. Now that is an investment that these people decide to make in themselves and their children and their community. On the other hand, if we've just had 5,000 houses built in our community, new houses with new population pouring in, and we have to build a high school to serve them, that's caused by the influx of population. And to lay that cost on all of us means that the existing population is going to pay a good bit of those costs and subsidize those developers. And the people who really benefit are land speculators. When you really get to the bottom of this, it's land speculation, which is some developers engage in and some don't. But it's that portion of the development business that's land speculation. Buy a farm, get it rezoned so you can build houses and shopping centers, and voila, you instantly are millions of dollars ahead.
Yeah, yeah. We've been criticizing some of the shortcomings of local governments, and let's look at what we want instead. There are some principles that both of you folks look at that you think should be guiding principles that would be good governance. You know, what are some qualities of what good governance would be?
There must be something.
You folks have
Well,
told me some, so I know you got some things in mind.
And a lot of these are in state law. The whole openness of the way government operates is just extremely important. The Open Public Meetings Act, the Open Records Act, the fact that we have a lot of public meetings to inform people about what's going on, and hearings, and our meetings are televised, except for the library district and the school districts. Don't ask me why that happened, but they won't televise, even though they're in the information business. This is a very important value. Simple efficiency is a very important value. We should, do our jobs as local government people as efficiently as we can. Jurisdictions ought to cooperate, and we have a very high level of cooperation within this county in provision of public services with our 911 system and our sewer system and our...
Well, the intercity transit is a great national award-winning local bus system, and they do all kinds of good stuff with van pools and all kinds of things.
And even where you don't see it, like in the case of police and fire, there are interlocal agreements in the police and fire services where these people back each other up automatically, instantly, whenever something's going on.
We actually do have there's a lot of good things that government in general and our local governments do, and sometimes they even do it on their own. But I think we've been told over the last year or so by various candidates for office, in fact, there's one notably successful one, is make me do it. And that's, I think, an essential part of public participation. And then on the jurisdiction's part, transparency, actually reaching out to the public and not just letting them know what they're doing, but to really draw them in to participate. We have different levels of, success in those cases. And I'll just mention, he said the library and I think the school districts are not televised. And I would say this is part of what Carnegie has done over the years. And I say that because was it an official Carnegie project, and did we?
And this is the Carnegie Group that we
the
mentioned
Carnegie
briefly
Group.
at the beginning.
I'm sorry.
And we'll talk about some more later. Go ahead.
But this is what happens. It's someone in the group gets an idea. They may find 2 or 3 other people that agree with them or want to get on that, and they'll go off and do it. And one of the things that we did was, or I was actually finally getting a chance to work at TCTV because I'd retired, and I thought, boy, I've got this time, I can do this. So we spent probably several years, going out and bringing, dragging, sometimes kicking and screaming, jurisdictions into the limelight to say, look, your public has a right to watch you make public policy that affects them, and notably Lacey, and I think the port, and we did the school district, we even did the library, but the library is tough because they run over 5 different counties. You got to follow them all over the place. And the school district, I kind of thought they were going to get the idea, but it never caught on.
Mm-hmm. There's another value of good local governance, and that's kind of a future orientation and a commitment to environmental sustainability. And we seem to have more of that in this area than some other parts of the country do. But any locality can do better at this. But there's something about a future focus of caring about the environment and caring about sustainability that seems to be as opposed to just like an immediate, let's consume it. And
I think that's one of the things that comes out of a public process. We've had a couple of unfortunate instances in recent years in this town. One is the upzoning of the isthmus, and the other is this recent unfortunate situation with the proposed Boys and Girls Club at Garfield School in Olympia, where deals were cut in back rooms and laid on the public rather than going to the public and involving the public up front in helping to decide what ought to be done. And ultimately, both of those got straightened around with a lot of public involvement. But there's so much wasted time and effort and pain using that approach.
Yeah, I want to have us look at a couple of case studies. One, most of the viewers will remember the conference center fiasco from the city of Olympia. A few years ago, the people of Olympia rose up in reaction to a proposal for a conference center for which there was no real need, and the public would have paid, but the private interest would have profited. And the old saying says you can't fight City Hall, but in this case, people did fight City Hall, and the people won. I wonder if one or both of you could like take 2 minutes to tell us that story and what lessons there are that we can learn from this.
Well, I did get very involved in that, so let me see if I can encapsulate it here. It started off with a proposal for a conference center, which again sounds like a good idea. Come on, everybody ought to have a conference, or every community ought to have a conference center, kind of like a community center, but it's not. Anyway, the proposed conference center would have been built by a private entity, and I think maybe a design and build kind of thing, but in any event, the city would have paid for the building and then would have hired some other component of the same private entity to run it. It was bad enough, I guess, as a capital project, but it was the operating aspect of it that really caught our attention. The city's own numbers were that they were going to lose about $900,000 a year running this conference center.
And that's taxpayers' money.
That's taxpayers' money. So the thing here is that you see, should you have a conference center? And you mentioned need. Absolutely. If there was a need for the conference center, then those entities that needed it would be available to fund it through use fees, rent, but there wasn't. So like so many projects, it was one that the private sector didn't want very much to do with.
Right,
So,
because if it were financially viable, some hotel or some other private entity would have done it on their own nickel.
Absolutely. In fact, as they would have crowded in front of any public entity that wanted to get in on the action.
Right, and the fact that they didn't want to put private money into it means that they were practicing what's been referred to as lemon socialism, where the only, if there's money to be made, the private sector will do it, and if there's something that's going to be a loser, they'll dump that onto the public.
Well, and what you often hear this presented as, and I'm so tired of hearing it, is that let's have a public-private partnership. Oh yeah, right. Let's put, and that's this. Well, we will put the benefits on this side and the costs on this side, and guess who's going to get which pot?
Yeah.
That's the way it always turns out. And I might just add here, sometimes you're surprised how you win. You really think you're going to do it by invigorating the public, and somehow we'll all rally, and they just won't do it because it's not the right thing. What happened is that we did that. But we also had recently proven, I guess, or demonstrated that we were not afraid to consider litigation. And so we considered litigation, and I think we got just as far as having the infamous letter from the attorney written, but it was from a very prominent environmental attorney. And that didn't do it per se, but what happened was, because of the threat of litigation, the city's bond rating dropped just enough they couldn't afford the project. And that's why it wasn't built.
Well, but people also rose up, and they were mad at the city council members.
Yep.
And people ran against them.
That happened too, yes.
And I mean, so we some city council members got turned out, didn't they?
I'm not sure on the conference center.
You know,
that was the next one around.
Well, you're pressing our memories now.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
Anything more than 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
Yeah, that goes back to.
Well, because our next case study, is there anything else on this? Because the next case study is the one where we did change city
one of the
council.
aspects of that is one of our members, and I guess we can mention someone. Hi, Phyllis. Phyllis Booth collected, I would say, over half of the 4,000 plus signatures. So we had things like a petition to show to the council. Right. And one other thing we did
Big
there.
signs.
Oh, yeah. Giant signs.
Let us vote.
Let us vote.
Yeah.
We just said, let us vote.
Yes.
But we were trying to figure out how to communicate this to the council members. And so we used, I think for the second time, because we used this first in Tumwater, was we went to the neighborhoods of each of the council members, knocked on doors, and asked them to sign the petition. Well, we came away and we took very good notes. So we were able to say, well, council member X, we were in your neighborhood, we knocked on this many doors, we talked to this many people, and here's the results. And the results were things like 77%, 85%. We kind of worked our way up and said, and council member, you win the prize. Your neighbors were 92% in favor of this petition. Does that mean anything to you? The answer was no. But we tried.
Okay. Well, I guess the thing I was thinking of was we had someone ran against the mayor. Somebody ran against the incumbent mayor. No, it wasn't you. It was a subsequent mayor. But when this thing was happening, and it was somebody who did not have any background.
Oh, that was Stan.
No, somebody ran against Mark.
No, it was
Mark.
No, it was against Mark.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
And a sweet young woman who had no background. And I don't mean this disparagingly, but she was a complete novice. But she was outraged enough by this. And with no real background in municipal whatever, she ran and she got I think it was 37% of the vote or something. It was a huge
high 40s.
No,
it was a huge amount of vote against a very expert, well-credentialed mayor.
Good guy.
And that was a serious challenge.
It was.
And people didn't vote for her because she had any particular knowledge, but she was just willing to run against the conference center and against the mayor who had been championing.
And the organization that we set up to oppose this was called Public Funds for Public Purposes, which goes back to your externality, internalizing things.
A perfect slogan for good governance.
Because that conference center explicitly from day one was to assist downtown businesses. That was the whole reason for it. Well, if the downtown businesses need that to help them, then they can fund their conference center. There's nothing stopping them from pooling their resources.
But this would have pulled public money into serving private profit, and that's not a good way to go.
By the way, I know you've got other things we want to talk about, but I just have to footnote this with. Then right after that, after they failed on the local level, then it comes up that I think the old GA building or whatever, they were going to build a conference center right in that area, that the state was going to do it, and that was going to be wonderful. Well, that didn't happen either because I think the economy started to squeeze
Yeah.
people, but it could have. And the same argument there, and I wrote, I just read it again tonight. It was not a bad letter, actually, to Senator Frazier. And the main point of my whole letter was, well, rather than a conference center to accommodate the folks that already have all kinds of facilities, already have access to the legislature, that's the problem. Why not build, call it what you want, but something for the public to come, so that when, in fact, as people had said, gee, when we come there, we can't find a place to park, give them a public place to come and have facilities, maybe, some kind of office and communications, so that the citizens could get connected with. And they didn't do that either.
Yeah. Well, and a bunch of communities built their public, their conference centers, and they're sitting around vacant. I mean,
everybody's taking a bath on that.
Local cities that got suckered into this, which Olympia
Let's see now.
did not get suckered into.
Wenatchee where?
Well, I mean, a bunch of places, everybody's going to want to come here to our town to come to these conferences, and people didn't. They're really left holding the bag on
It
these.
was the fad du jour. I
It
remember.
was
I have a
a
long
fad.
enough memory that I remember back when industrial parks were
yeah.
the fad du jour.
Yeah, yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
If you wanted to bring a good employer to your community
right.
and thought that was a good thing, you just had to go out, buy acreage, and set it up, and they'd come.
I want to cover a more recent case study. People fought Olympia City Hall around the issue of having tall buildings down on the isthmus. And there's one mistake by the lake. It's 9 stories tall, but the city council had raised the heights allowed for new buildings, and the public said, "Oh no." Tell us that story if you could, pretty briefly. If you could do
This is
about
just
2 minutes.
I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and the isthmus is, for people watching this, is the area between Capitol Lake and Butt Inlet, downtown,
Or between downtown and the west side. It's a little strip.
4th and 5th Avenue connects downtown with West Olympia.
Yeah.
And the mistake by the lake is there. It's almost 50 years old. Everybody wants it gone. And we're working on that right now, by the way. To add insult to injury, they were going to add more tall buildings, nearly as tall as that one. Really immense condo and commercial complex there. Much more volume, much bigger buildings by far than the existing one that is so bad. And we had thousands of signatures from people. We had hundreds of people testifying, writing letters, all the rest of it. The city council was not going to be moved and went ahead with the upzoning from the 35-foot level, 3-story level that had been there many, many years, to 90 feet being allowed there. And in the subsequent 2 elections, all of the people who voted for that were either voted out of office or decided not to run again.
Yeah, so it was a case where you can indeed fight City Hall and win when the city council was doing something really stupid and against the public interest.
The government does belong to the people, and wise public servants recognize that every day, all day. That's what you need, even when it's frustrating. The government does belong to the people.
Yeah, and there is an effort I know you're active with, and we actually did a program on here on this series about converting that isthmus to a public park. And at the end of the show, we'll have the website and the phone number for people who want to get involved with it. It's an ongoing project. It's going to take some years to do.
Yes.
But we definitely are going to do that. And there's a chance of having the public interest prevail over the private interest that would have privatized that space for bad usage. And instead we can have something that the community can share. So that's way better, and protect these great views to and from the Capitol. There's another case study that both of you folks have been active with, and this is dealing with the Port of Olympia. We want folks who have a good sense about what good governance would be. We want governments to work toward environmental care and long-term sustainability. We want local governments to serve the broad public interest instead of narrow private interests. We want governmental processes that are accountable and transparent. And you folks have been working, trying to change the Port of Olympia in several ways.
Go ahead.
Could
Go ahead, he says. Yeah,
share
go
some
ahead.
thoughts with us?
So I get to change it, right? Huh?
Go for it.
Well,
Well-
you're not the only one working on that.
No, not at all. In fact, I just want to start with that, pointing out that how many years ago now, maybe 6 or 7, most people in the Carnegie Group, again, didn't exactly know what the port was. Not unlike a lot of people today.
Yeah.
They just don't know what the port is.
Yeah.
They don't realize it's a county-wide thing.
Right.
Well, a woman came to us. She's a nurse, and she is indefatigable, Jan Witt. And she introduced us to, it happened to be an airport kind of issue. But by the way, the port runs the airport. Mm-hmm. Anyway, within a year, I would say the Carnegie agenda had almost been transformed. We were doing so many different things with ports, and then we got involved with the peninsula and the whole marine aspect of the port. And we were involved in several lawsuits, and we just did all kinds of port stuff. There probably had 3 or 4 different port things going on at the same time. So what's wrong with the port? Well, first of all, you might ask why we have one. You know, we're at the absolute bottom of the second biggest estuary system in the country. We happen to be a little deeper than Chesapeake Bay, but I'm telling you, at the bottom of it here, this is not a deep water port.
No, and it keeps filling up again.
It's funny how that works. That
It fills up with
mouths
all
of rivers.
the silt that flows downstream and
That's
dumps
right.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a deep water port, but they want to pretend that it is.
Well, and I guess it had its day. I don't know that it ever had its day with real, you know, deep draft shipping, but that's right. We're kind of playing at being a port, I think.
You have some concerns about transparency, accountability, how they do things, how decisions get made.
The public records thing, I don't know the details of it.
Yes, one of the legal issues we got involved in was request for public records relative to the Weyerhaeuser lease. That was the biggest recent thing that's happened in terms of real impact on the port. Notice that a big portion of the port is now home to what I call a horizontal forest, and we're now shipping logs out of here. But anyway, the public records request was relative to some concerns we had, and the port was, let's say, less than responsive, and we did end up, a penalty was assessed to them. Although more recently that has come to complete closure, and we did not prevail in the last part, but it was so typical of the port. In fact, as Judge Hicks, who was involved at kind of a important point there, editorialized in his decision and said something to the effect of, it's puzzling why the port spends so much time trying to hide these records. Having looked at them, they don't look terribly, you know, meaningful, I guess. But is that they could have, it would have been much easier for them just to have ponied them up.
At the larger level, nationwide, we have a huge problem with big money buying elections, especially after the Citizens United decision that really opened the spigots. During the November 2012 election, we saw just unprecedented amounts of billions of dollars flowing into elections, buying elections. And so if you want to look for good governance, that would seem to be something to remedy. I know there's a movement afoot to amend the Constitution that says money is not speech. It's okay to regulate how much is spent on campaigns and how it's given and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a whole movement afoot to amend the Constitution with some pretty specific remedies. Are there anything you want to say about that aspect or other larger level scope of how we could fix what ails us in governance.
Well, we in the Carnegie Group do tend to focus more on local issues, but
Yeah.
we do get involved in state and national issues. And I have read that a couple of other states have already, the legislatures have passed resolutions urging Americans United to be overturned.
Yeah, and
one
a
way
number
or
of
another.
local jurisdictions have done this as well.
And so that it's not something we voted on, but I feel quite confident that the Carnegie Group members would be in favor of
Yeah.
overturning that.
Yeah, and there are a lot of activities locally and around where people can hook in if you were to find the organizations or ways to get involved.
Yeah.
We've talked about the Carnegie Group a number of times. Let's talk some more about what that is. We've been lifting up on this program some good principles about how to do local government right, and we've been sharing some stories and some insights and some principles. The Carnegie Group has been active since 1996, and can you tell us about some of the group's basic purposes and what the origin was? How did?
Well, 1996, that's exactly right. And since then we have, I did the math, it's 16 times 52, it's 853, I think.
Because you meet every week.
Every week.
Consecutive
That's amazing.
Mondays, right. We have never missed. In fact, a couple of times, at least one time, remember, Bob and I were the only ones there in the rain, and it was Christmas Eve, and we came down to, in fact, it was a short meeting. But we started, frankly, it was a group of us that was going to some kind of presentation downtown in the afternoon. It got postponed to that evening, and so rather than disband, we hung around and we thought, well, let's just go someplace and talk. I don't remember where we went that day, but very soon we started to meet in the little cupola, I call it, on top of the Carnegie Library, the Carnegie building.
Which by that time was a local restaurant.
Yeah, it
the
wasn't-
library, the new library had been built downtown on
Right.
8th.
Right.
And this became a restaurant. And I know
Bookstore.
I've,
Bookstore and restaurant.
yeah, bookstore and
Yeah,
restaurant,
yeah. So we went to a couple of other places before we ended up where we are now, but fairly early on we kept getting asked, well, what's the name of your group? We've heard about good things about you. And we said, well, we don't have a name. We got tired of saying that, so finally we decided, well, let's call it the Carnegie Group. Well, you can probably suspect that may strike some people as a little bit of a misnomer, but let's focus on the second half of Andrew Carnegie's career, and so that it looks a little bit more appropriate. But we were actually interested in some things that were a little different than we are today. Jim Weber had been elected to the Lacey Council, and I think you weren't mayor then yet, or I can't remember. But the three of us were on one of the larger city councils, and we were involved in things like gray water, but it quickly became growth and the things that growth were doing to us. So we went from there.
Yeah, and I don't know how soon that question growth thing came along, but that's, growth should pay for growth, question growth. These kinds of things became kind of like your,
It was
kind of a,
I was not there at the very beginning of this, the formation of the Carnegie Group, but my understanding was that the thought was that there were already groups working on the environmental impacts of growth and traffic impacts and so forth. It was this hidden piece, the financial piece, the subsidy, financial subsidy that did not see the light of day.
Yeah.
Nobody was talking about it or dealing with it, and so the group took that on. Since then, the Carnegie Group has been involved in a wide variety of issues. It has become, I would call it, the best description I think is it's a cooperative of good government activists.
yeah.
We meet every week, we talk about issues, we take action, sometimes individually, sometimes in small groups, sometimes with other organizations, occasionally as the Carnegie Group. We sometimes still testify as the Carnegie Group or write a letter as the Carnegie Group. But that's who we are. We're activists in the good government. A number of us are members of the League of Women Voters. I'm one of those. The same kind of good government principles, except we act a little faster, well, a lot faster than the League. We don't have the restrictions of the national procedures and so forth to be worried about. And that's who we are. We just, if we see something, we take it on.
Well, and you've got credibility. You've established a track record, and you got some really talented, smart people doing things. And the information that you put out and the things you do, my experience has been that you've been able to establish a lot of credibility and respect because you got your act together.
Well, we hope so. We also work with other groups. We have members who are active in Sierra Club, active in Audubon, active in Friends of the Waterfront, the Vista Park Association, the League of Women Voters, and so there's this kind of interlocking directorate or interlocking membership of people.
I actually talked to a couple of our, we can't, well, we can call them members, I guess, but again, we don't have any real membership. Jan Witt, and I also talked with Jean Jajic. Don't try to spell that unless you're from Eastern Europe because it's terrible. But just a couple of perspectives from there. Gene felt, and I kind of knew before I talked to him, he wasn't being overly critical. He was just saying, well, he noted that we'd strayed somewhat from where we started, and we were doing some of these more general good government things. And he said that's not all bad, but he thought that perhaps on balance we might, have been more effective if we'd have stayed more focused on what we started at. Jan had a very interesting perspective. She came to us with, she had an issue and she'd heard of us and she came there and she got what she wanted. She said, what happens is you go there and it's a place where you can talk about what's important to you, and there are some people there that have got experience in making some of these things happen. And so she says, you come there, if nothing else, you get validation and affirmation. And sometimes you get some real concrete assistance, and of course, like I said, she just kind of transformed our agenda. It was kind of amazing.
There have been several other, particularly startup organizations that want to take on an issue. The Rocky Prairie Group was one, and they came to us and we chatted about how you do this. How do you do this activism? How are you successful? And so we're able to give them a faster start. For a good government effort somewhere.
And they got really good at it.
They got very good at it.
Really good at it.
So when you've attracted folks to come to you and you've done some stuff, are there some lessons learned? Are there some things where, beyond the list of actual accomplishments, are there some things like, oh, okay, now we have better insights about this or that, or how to do something, or here's what worked, here's what didn't work, or?
Well, certainly in the legal realm, every time you get involved in one of these legal actions, you learn more about the courts, and the best thing, of course, is to have a pro bono attorney.
Absolutely.
Or if you're going to hire one, hire a good one. But yeah, I mean, every day you learn. To me, this is second nature. This is what being a human being is about, is trying to make your society better, make things work better. What else are we supposed to do with our lives but that? And we happen to choose this area of public policy making, particularly at the local level. Other people work on homeless issues. Some people volunteer at the blood bank or at the school or whatever. There are just so many good things going on in the community where people volunteer their time. We just happen to be these kind of policy geek sorts of people, and we know that it has an impact. The numbers get very big very quickly, and we can have an impact. I think it's also important to say that we are a very positively oriented kind of group. I don't want to give anyone the impression that we think government is bad. And my career was in government. And we both served on city councils. And most of what goes on in government is good stuff. We count on the people who patch the potholes, and the firefighters and the police officers and the parks and recreation people to provide services. It's where things get off kilter, and particularly where public funds start to be used not for public purposes, but for private purposes, that it's wrong and it needs to be monitored. And there are people who can benefit from that kind of shenanigan, and they are wealthy and they are powerful, and they need to be resisted.
Yeah.
That's our job.
Well, I think that's a really good point, is that government as an institution and the structure of it is not usually what's wrong. It's simply the incumbents. It's who gets into office, and it's a pretty simple thing to change. We don't have to dissolve our form of government and start over again.
Yeah. Or what happens to the incumbents after they've been incumbents for a while, even if they start out good, and then later become less good as they get more entrenched.
That can happen.
Well,
Sometimes it does.
That's something that I've really noticed, and I don't have an explanation for it.
Yeah.
And one of the organizations that we've had a part in forming is an organization called Citizens for Responsive Local Government, and its whole mission is to find good people to run for city council, find good people to volunteer to be on advisory bodies like the Planning Commission, and the Parks Board, and the Arts Commission.
We need that,
and so
because
forth.
if we don't have good folks on there, you'll have somebody who has a private stake in this thing.
Yeah.
Invariably,
then we lose the public value.
Right.
We have just a bit of time left. I wonder if we can get a short closing thought from each of you, and either of you may go first.
I just did mine.
Oh, that was it.
I do this.
Oh,
this
sure.
is my life. I mean, this is, helping a community work better together in as many ways as we can. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, and both of you have good long track records in your own careers, both in elected office and otherwise doing that.
I think probably any organization like this is to be, of course, very candid about your successes and your failures, but often it seems like we're almost modest or something and not talking about the things that we're successful at. And that's not the important part about it. The important part is to present and for the public, to let them know that successes are possible. And you were talking about when public got mobilized, and that's exactly what happens. That's what it takes, and it really can work. It's not easy, but it can work.
Well, good. I appreciate having a chance to talk with both of you about the issues you work about and to lift up some visibility for the Carnegie Group that people may have heard about but not had a clear enough sense of who are these folks and what do they do and how do they do it. So I want to thank both of you for being guests on the program, Walt Jorgensen and Bob Jacobs. I want to thank all the folks who've been watching. If you want real democracy, we have to get involved in making the decisions about public policy at the national, state, and local levels. Otherwise, the special interests will shape the decisions to make money for themselves at our expense. They profit by ripping us off, by degrading our environment, and by corrupting our governments. At the outset, let's watch out for hidden assumptions. What benefits one sector of the community might harm other sectors. Let's serve the broad public interest. Let's watch out for bias in wording. Not all growth is good. Remember that cancer is a growth. We need to distinguish between growth that is good for the overall community and growth that imposes burdens and costs upon us. Don't count on mainstream media to inform us. Mainstream media are owned by giant corporations with their own agendas. Mainstream media are funded by advertising by some of the rich special interests that profit by telling us only one side of the story. Read and watch alternative media. Finally, let's participate in grassroots organizations, such as the Carnegie Group, that are independent, conscientious, and ethical. You can get information about a wide variety of issues related to peace, social justice, and nonviolence by contacting the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation at 360-491-9093, www.olympiafor.org. We're all one human family and we all share one planet. We can make the world a better place, but we all have to do our part, and the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks.
you.